Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I see people are beginning to join. My name is Danny McCoy. I'm the president of the Statistical and Social Inquiry Society of Ireland. Welcome to our fourth ordinary meeting of the 174th session. Tonight we've got a paper on income volatility on dairy farms in Ireland. And the authors, Jason Loughrey, Declan O'Connor, Trevor Donnellan, Thia Hennessy, and Fiona Thorne. Jason is going to present, and he'll do so in a few moments' time. We're also very fortunate tonight to have the proposal of the vote of thanks by Tadhg Buckley of the Irish Farmers Association and Paul Caskie of Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute of Northern Ireland. And then we will open up to the floor. So if you want to make your contributions, you can use the chat function or the Q&A function on Zoom. And I'll ask you to come in, unmute your mic, and also for the purpose of recording for the journal as well, we will ask you to send your comments to the secretary at sisi.ie. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the secretary, the honorary secretary, Ronan Lyons, to read the minutes of the minutes of the last meeting, and to talk about some rule changes that we're proposing as well. Over to you, Ronan.
Thank you very much, Danny. So firstly, it's my job to read the minutes of the last ordinary meeting of the Society, which is the third meeting of the 174th session. And that took place at 5 o'clock on Thursday, the 21st of January this year, online due to the COVID-19 pandemic and associated restrictions on physical meetings, with the assistance of Trinity Research and Social Sciences. The President, Danny McCoy, was in the chair for this year's Barrington Lecture, and the lecture was by Dr. Niall Farrell of Queen's University Belfast, and entitled, "Has Fuel Poverty Changed and How Should Policy Respond? Charting Fuel Poverty in Ireland from 1987 to 2015. During the subsequent discussion, questions and contributions were made by Sean Lyons, Jerry Brady, Barra Rowntree, Dorothy Watson, Siobhan Carey, and Darren McCoy. Following the discussion and response from the author, the President thanked those who had contributed and brought the meeting to a close. Now, as the President mentioned there, we are in the middle of some proposed rule changes, and under the rules of the Society, any rule changes have to be read before the Society at 2 consecutive meetings. So at that meeting, we started by reading the proposed rule changes. So if you'll bear with me, there are 4 rules that are being changed. What I'm going to do is, the full text is available on the SISI website. What I'm going to do is read the proposed text of each of the new rules, as in for Rule 6, the proposed text, and for Rule 8, and so on. So we'll start with the proposed text for Rule 6. Ordinary and group members shall pay a yearly subscription. This sum shall include the subscription for the Journal of the Society. The subscription becomes due on the 1st of October each year and is payable in advance. Ordinary members may compound for life their annual subscription by a single specified payment. No ordinary member shall be entitled to any privileges of the Society or to vote at any meetings of the Society while his or her subscription is unpaid. No subscription shall be payable by honorary members. Subscriptions shall be determined from time to time by the Council, and any proposed alteration shall be ratified by a resolution passed at an ordinary meeting of the Society. So that is the proposed text for Rule 6. If you would like to see the original, obviously please do so on the SISI website. For Rule 8, and this is a trimming, honestly. I'm going to read out the proposed text for Rule 8 now. 8 members of the Council, in addition to those who retire under Law 10, shall retire each year and shall be eligible for re-election without nomination. The retiring members of the Council shall be those who are most senior in membership of the Council by reference to the latest date of election of each member of the Council. In the event of equal seniority, the member or members who shall retire shall be decided by agreement, reflecting by member participation, or by lot. At an ordinary at an ordinary meeting of the Society, normally to be held in the month of May each year, vacancies on the Council shall be filled by election. Notice of such election shall be given by the honorary secretaries to each member of the Society not less than 21 days before such meeting, and none but members shall vote at such meeting. Any member wishing to nominate a candidate for election under this law who has previously obtained the consent of such person shall forward the name of the candidate to the honorary secretaries not less than 10 days preceding such meeting. That was a biggie. There are 2 last rules. Rule 13, the proposed text of which reads, "The Council shall meet whenever summoned by the honorary secretaries of the Society on the instructions of the President. or on a requisition in writing signed by any 3 members of the council. 5 members shall form a quorum and the president shall have a casting vote. Procedure at meetings of the council shall be determined by the council. The final rule change, nearly there now, rule number 18. The session shall commence in the month of September and close in the month of May, and if possible, at least 7 ordinary meetings shall be held in each session. If convenient, the president or a vice president shall read an address at either the opening or closing meeting. So thanks for your patience as we went through that technicality. I'll hand back over to the president now as we get started with the main business.
Thanks very much, Ronan. So as I said, the main business of the night is the paper. So hand over to you, Jason.
Okay, thank you, Danny. And thank you, Ronan, for the introduction. Okay, so I'll begin. So this is some research that we've been undertaking for the last couple of years on income volatility of dairy farms in Ireland, and it's work with Declan O'Connor from the Munster Technological University, Thia Hennessy in University College Cork, and my colleagues in Teagasc, Trevor Donnellan and Fiona Thorne. So I welcome everybody to this presentation, and thank you for attending. And I hope you find that this of interest. I know many of you are from an agricultural economics background, but maybe some of you are not. I'd like to acknowledge that this research was actually made possible through some funding from Dairy Research Ireland. I'd like to also acknowledge the farmers participating in the Teagasc National Farm Survey and the Teagasc farm reporting staff. Much of this research depends on the availability of farm level data from the Teagasc National Farm Survey. I'd also like to thank Brian Moran for his work in coordinating the survey, the editors of this journal, the Statistical Social Inquiry Society of Ireland journal, the contribution of 2 anonymous referees, and of course Trinity Research and Social Sciences, and particularly Maeve McGrath in the organisation of the event. So just some background in terms of dairy farming in Ireland. There are approximately 16,100 specialist dairy farms, according to the most recent available farm structure survey. We await some indication of more recent changes in dairy farm numbers, but the total number of specialist dairy farms in Ireland is in the region of 16,000 to 16,500. The vast majority of these farms are located in the south and east regions. So in the border Midlands and West, there may be 3,500 specialist dairy farms in the BMW region. So it's largely concentrated in the south and east regions, and particularly in the southeast and southwest, and also in the Midwest. Total milk production, most recently in 2020, was in the region of 8.3 million litres at a national level. The average farm size is approximately 58 hectares, so that's above average by in comparison to other farming systems in Ireland. Average herd size has increased significantly in the last number of years, and I'll go into more detail later about this, but currently the average is about 80 cows per farm. Dairy farms in Ireland are largely dependent on family labour, so an average of 1.4 family labour units per farm. Some farms are quite dependent on hired labour, say from outside the family, but this tends to be a minority of specialist dairy farms. So the average is about 0.25 non-family labour units. One important indicator that I will speak about is family farm income. So I'll just briefly provide the definition for family farm income, which is the gross output less the expenses, so both direct expenses and overheads, and it includes subsidy receipts. Family labour is not included in the family farm income. So family farm income really, what it refers to is the return to the factors of production, family labour, management and investment. In the paper, I provide some background in terms of the data. Most of this data comes from the Teagasc National Farm Survey. And here I show just some of the main variables, the mean and standard deviation for the period of study. Just in terms of family farm income, the average is over the period from 1995 to 2018 is 41,175. But of course, and I'll go into more detail later, that there has been quite an increase over time in the average family farm income. Prior to 2006, dairy farms did not receive particularly large subsidies directly from the government. But since 2006 and the introduction of decoupled payments, dairy farmers have received an average basic payment of approximately 16,447. As you can see here, milk volume has increased substantially since the abolition of quota in 2015. The average quantity of milk sales was up close to 380,000 in the 2015 to 2018 period, and this compares to just under 210,000 in the during the quota era from 1996 to 2014. So the milk quota was introduced in 1984. I don't have data going back that far, but as you can see here, that the average creamery milk sales was much lower during the quota era. And concurrently, there's been an increase in the number of dairy cows. Average family farm income has been quite volatile in recent years. So the average can hide quite a lot. I suppose some farms will experience more volatility than others. But just taking the average family farm income from each year, you can see there certainly since 2007, there's been a significant amount of volatility in the family farm income. So particularly there in terms of 2009, a very large drop in family farm income evident in that particular year. Again, in 2017, you have a large increase in family farm income from 2016. So volatility is largely around about directionless change in prices and incomes. And there are examples of large increases and large decreases in average income over time. So in terms of percentage changes, again, these are also evident as well. Also on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see there that the percentage changes can be anything up to 100% change in average income from one year to the next. But in recent years, there have been examples of -20 or +20 in the average income. So milk prices are obviously as a large contributor to the overall gross output on dairy farms, and in the last decade or so, milk prices have shown a lot of volatility. relative to the period up to 2007. So this explains much of the volatility in incomes during that time. And milk prices in 2016 were close to just 25 cents a litre, and in 2009 the situation was even worse at less than 25 cents a litre. So for many farms, those incidences of low milk prices brought the milk price below the cost of production in those 2 years. At the same time, there are examples of milk prices reaching above 35 cents a litre in 2013 and during the course of the summer of 2017 as well. One important thing to note is that the standardized milk price and the standardized milk price is based on certain constituents, so protein and fat constituents, whereas the actual milk price can depart from the standardized milk price because the constituents protein and fat are above the standard of 3.3% protein, 3.7% fat. And that has been the case in recent years. Farms have improved in terms of the milk quality. So farmers are producing milk with higher protein and fat content over time. So the actual milk prices are somewhat above the standardized prices. And this is contributing to farmer incomes, both during the good times and the periods when milk prices are low. So there you can see in 2016, the milk price during the course of the summer dipping to approximately 25 cents a litre. So this was quite soon after the abolition of milk quota. So during this time, farmers were quite concerned about the situation. And there were few risk management tools available for farmers to deal with the low milk prices during this time. But global markets quickly improved in the autumn, and in 2017, prices were above 35 cents a litre. So during the course of any given year, there can be quite significant changes in milk prices. So milk production has increased substantially since the removal of milk quotas, but even prior to the removal of milk quotas in 2015, there were significant increases in milk production. So the abolition of milk quota was announced in late 2008, and the European Commission permitted a gradual increase in milk production in each member state for the period leading up to 2015. But this was not a smooth transition. So you can see there between 2009 and 2015 that in some years the milk production increased notably, whereas in others it didn't change, or in some cases actually declined. And this could be attributable to the milk prices at any given time. So during the 2011, when milk prices were reasonably good, production expanded, but during 2012, and of course in 2009 as well, there was less evidence of increasing production. So I've spoken already about the improvements in, say, milk quality, the fat and protein content of milk, and that this is a major contributor to improving farm incomes. So the output side, which can be composed of the output prices and volumes of milk, largely speaking. There are also subsidies and in some cases other enterprises, but largely it's about the milk price and the volume of milk production. But incomes are also determined by what happens in input prices and input volumes. And input prices have been quite volatile at times, and we are seeing it more recently in the last number of months. But here there is clear evidence of high volatility in some of the essential inputs, such as feed and also fertilizer. So in 2009, you can see there are 2008 rather, large increases in input prices in 2008, and while there was some decline in 2009, there was still elevated input prices during that period, and there's been evidence of quite a lot of volatility in input prices since then, and this contributes overall to the volatility in margins and income. So therefore, the net margin per litre, what we call the net margin per litre, where we subtract all of the costs per litre from the output per litre, we arrive with a net margin per litre. That net margin per litre has been quite volatile over the last decade or so. There's no real clear evidence of an increase or even a decrease in the net margin per litre over time. So the growth in dairy farm incomes is largely due to increasing scale of production. And sometimes we report the mean of the average family farm income, but I think it's also interesting to note the median. So the median will tend to be somewhat below the mean in any given year. So this is the median case, I suppose. And there you can see, again, quite a lot of volatility in the median farm income over time. 2016 was a period of low prices, and also 2009, whereas we had relatively high prices in 2011 and 2017. Family farm income didn't actually decline on average or for the median by much in 2016 because some farms were actually increasing their production during 2016, which helped offset some of the price declines. This presentation is not really about the distribution as such, but I think it's interesting to know more about the distribution in terms of the median and the interquartile range as such. So here I illustrate the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile farm income in each year. So there you can see that a certain widening maybe in the distribution between the 25th percentile and the 27th percentile over time. And you can see there also that the income in the 25th percentile is relatively low. It's generally below 40,000 in most years of late. And one more slide on the distribution, and I think this is important. Just size and distribution of direct payments. Payments are distributed unequally, I suppose, between farms. So here you can see that on the vertical axis, the share of farms and the value of the direct payment on the horizontal axis. So there you can see maybe the top 20% of farms are receiving above, actually about the top 30% of farms are receiving above €20,000 per annum in direct payments. There's a subset of farms then which are receiving payments of less than €10,000, but there's a substantial share then of farms that are receiving between 10 and 20,000 euro of payments. So the level of the payments is important, because the more direct payment that you receive, the more of a buffer you have against income volatility from the market. And direct payments are not linked with production. So it doesn't depend on how much on how much milk is actually produced on the farm. So so in terms of income volatility, then the paper contains a series of graphs to describe the level of income volatility on Irish dairy farms. And one of the methods, I suppose, that we use has been used elsewhere in the literature, both on farm household incomes and household income volatility in general. The ARC percentage change in farm income. And sometimes you might see in the literature the use of the standard deviation of percentage changes. But here we keep it quite simple. We just describe the ARC percentage change in farm income in each year, and it is based on the change in income over the average of the current year and the preceding year. And in doing this, we avoid calculating or generating, say, extreme values for the percentage changes in income. So it's a nice method to describe income volatility from one year to the next. You could also use the coefficient of variation and other measures as well. So the absolute ARC percentage change in farm income for the top third of the farm income distribution. That is what we would describe here. And on the vertical axis, you see that the median ARC percentage change, and it goes from anything from 0 to 200%. And so there in 2009, I suppose, and again in 2017, you have the biggest ARC percentage changes. But of course, these are two very different years in terms of farm income. 2009 is a particularly difficult year, and the ARC percentage change in income approaches 55–60%, even with the inclusion of the direct payments. In 2017, the volatility is very much a positive one, the recovery from the crisis of the summer in 2016. Interestingly, the percentage changes in income don't really stand out for 2015 and 2016. These were difficult years for milk price, certainly towards the end of 2015 and into the summer of 2016. However, because farmers were increasing their production levels, the poor milk price didn't show up as much in the family farm income number. So the percentage change in farm income, the median case of about 20% among the top third of the farm income distribution. And what I've done here is I've also included I've included farm income with direct payments and without direct payments. So without direct payments, we're saying, well, what would have been the case if there were no direct payments? And there you see for most years there's not a particularly big difference actually among the top income farmers, because the direct payments constitute a relatively small proportion of their overall farm income. Of course, in 2009, the crisis was such that direct payments did matter quite a lot, but in most years, direct payments did not matter a great deal. Now, I suppose one question you'll probably ask is, well, do farmers change? Is there income mobility evident in the data? Yes, there is to some extent. So some farmers will move from the top income third to the middle third from year to year, but that's generally about 20% of farms in the top incomes. So there is some income mobility from year to year, but largely speaking, if a farmer is in the top third in one year, they're likely to be in the top third in the following year. This contrasts then with the bottom third. So in the bottom third, you see quite an important role for the direct payments. So in the absence of the direct payments, percentage changes in family farm income would have been much bigger. And this is evident in most years. Even with direct payments, the percentage changes, the median case tends to be quite high. So to some extent that can be dependent on the choice of method. But it is quite a contrast between the top income and the bottom income in terms of the percentage changes in income from one year to the next. And one of the contributing factors to that can be both scale on the one hand, but costs of production. So just in terms of the direct costs, of production between the lowest third of the income distribution, the middle third and the top third, and the bottom third of the dairy farm income distribution tends to have higher costs, direct costs per litre than other farms who are higher up the distribution. So approximately 2 cents per litre in most years. The bottom third have higher costs per litre in that range. So cost, the differentials in costs explain some of the large fluctuations in terms of the percentage changes in income from one year to the next. Because just simply if the cost per litre is high, then there's a lower gap between the output price and the input and the inputs. So there, as a result, you have larger percentage changes in income. I'll provide the example here of 2018 to show that the reliance on basic payments. And 2018 was a difficult year in some respects because of the drought during the summer. So input prices and output prices are important, but also there can be in both 2013 and 2018, we witnessed weather events which impacted on input costs. And in 2018, there was a significant drought during the summer. And there in this graph, you can see that the farms on less than €40,000 of farm income tend to be quite dependent on the basic payment. So even taking the category of 20 to 39,000 farm income, the basic payment constitutes about 40%, almost 40% of the farm income in this category. And there you have an average of 54 dairy cows. And that rises through the farm income distribution. The farms with more than €100,000 in farm income during that year had an average of 145 dairy cows. So the top, to enter the top third of the farm income the dairy farm income distribution, you probably need quite a large herd size. And there you can see that this 100+ category constitutes about 15% of the sample in 2018, but this would have been more in 2017 when the milk price was better and when the input situation was also better. So up until recently, we've had limited risk management tools to deal with all of these issues. So farmers have been limited in terms of their capacity, I suppose, to manage the risks associated with volatile milk prices and input costs and so forth. There's also institutional risks around subsidies and so forth as well. But I think this research is mainly concerned with the volatility of milk prices and one of the risk management tools that emerged in the last decade is fixed milk price contracts. So those of you are probably familiar with forward contracts, maybe will know something about this. But in its simplest form, a forward contract is an agreement to buy or sell a stated price in the future. So in the case of the fixed milk price agreements, farmers enter into a contract with their processor about the milk price for a period of time, which can be anything from 9 months to 3 or 5, even 5 years in some cases. Glanbia was the first of the milk processors in Ireland to announce a fixed price contract in late 2010. So Glanbia is the largest milk processor in Ireland, and very much led the way in terms of the introduction of these contracts. And farmers supplying milk to Glanbia therefore had some advantage in terms of risk management during the early years. This was eventually followed by the introduction of fixed milk price guarantees by a number of other processors. So over time, these contracts have become more widely available. But there's still, in the early years, there's quite a lot of variability in the fixed milk price contracts. Glanbia offered 9 contracts between 2011 and 2017, whereas many of the other processors offered maybe 1 or 2 contracts during the course of that time. So during that volatile phase, late 2015 and into 2016, there was quite a lot of variability in the availability of fixed milk price contracts, and therefore quite a lot of variability in the extent to which farmers could manage the risks. Now, in more recent years, milk processors have offered more contracts. These contracts have become more widely available. One thing to note is the maximum share of production in each contract. So this varied from anything from a maximum of 10% in some cases to 20% in others. And Glanbia, being the leader in terms of providing these contracts, allowed for situations where farmers could participate in multiple contracts at any given time. So therefore, some farmers would have been able to commit more than 20% of their milk production into a fixed price contract. Just taking the example of 2016, and I know price varied during the course of 2016, but just taking the annual average and comparing the adopters of fixed price contracts to the non-adopters in that year, this is based on the Teagasc National Farm Survey data. So we ran an independent sample t-test comparison of the 2 groups. I found, yes, a statistically significant difference between the adopters and the non-adopters in 2016, of approaching 1%, or 1 cent per litre. We found that, yes, family farm income was larger on the adopters, but the difference in the milk price is not sufficient to explain all of the difference in family farm income. And one of the reasons why the adopters have larger farm incomes in that year is because they actually produce quite a lot more milk. So the adopters have larger milk production and benefit from the fixed milk price contracts in that particular year. So the early adopters benefited from the availability of fixed milk price contracts, and they tended to be larger. This was still evident in 2017, but in 2017 we didn't actually find a statistically significant difference in milk price between the adopters and the non-adopters. So no major difference between the 2, and that we may have expected because spot prices were really high at the time, and the fixed price contracts were in the low 30s in terms of the fixed prices. So we would have expected maybe a difference here, but we didn't find it in the data. Farm income is higher again among the adopters in 2017, and there was also some difference maybe in the basic payment, but not much. So 4 possible reasons for the result in 2017, and there are a number of others possible to add to this, but as I've shown earlier, that the share of total production in the fixed contract can be quite low. can even be as low as 5%. Some of these contracts expired during the summer of 2017, which meant that some farmers would have only been covered for a proportion of the year. And then there's a combination of maybe 1 and 2 where some farmers actually were only participating in fixed milk price contracts for a relatively short part of the year and for a low share of production. There is some evidence maybe of pro-cyclicality in the fixed prices. So the demand for fixed price contracts at any given price tends to decline if the markets are moving in the direction of higher milk prices. And there was some evidence of this in 2017. I'm not saying it's particularly strong, but it may have played a role as well. So in conclusion, I think I have just a few minutes now. Income volatility is an established challenge for dairy farmers since 2007, 2008. Direct payments are an effective risk management tool at the farm level. From a policy point of view, maybe contention there, but at the farm level, direct payments are viewed as an effective risk management tool. The changes to these payments in new iterations of the cap should be considered, among other things, from a risk management point of view. Fixed price contracts are increasing in popularity, so the availability of them is increasing over time. During the 2016 crisis, they were less widely available. This hampered the efforts of farmers to manage risk. But the early evidence suggests that they kind of some limited impact in terms of the short run volatility. But again, you see the example there of 2017 where there was no statistically significant difference evident from the data that the impact can be quite small or not, at least not evident from the statistics. There is need for more research regarding the adoption of these contracts, the reasons why so many farmers do not adopt fixed price contracts, and also the longer term effects on volatility. So much of the research is based on short run changes in farm income, based on the percentage changes in income from one year to the next. But there's a need to look over the longer term. Fixed milk price contracts just offer protection for the output prices. So we also see there from the data that there are episodes of volatility in input costs and so forth. So farmers need a toolbox of risk management tools. Different processors have different capacities to actually provide fixed milk price contracts maybe. So different farmers will need added protection beyond fixed milk price contracts in managing the income volatility and the income uncertainty, I suppose, more accurately. So thank you for listening, and comments and questions are very welcome. I hope you find it an interesting presentation. Thank you.
Jason, thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to our first proposer for the vote of thanks tonight. So Tadhg, if you could come on screen there. So Tadhg Buckley from the Irish Farmers Association will propose the first vote of thanks.
Thank you, Danny. Can you see that screen?
We can, yeah. Unless do you want to make it on slideshow? Yeah, okay.
You can see that. Super. So first of all, thanks a million for the opportunity today. And it's my first time playing this role, so hopefully I wasn't entirely certain what how to go about this. So I've put a few slides together, and hopefully people will find it beneficial. I suppose before I start, I found the paper of real interest. I'm from a dairy farming background. I grew up on a dairy farm and still involved in the dairy farming industry directly myself, along with working with the IFA. So I have to say that as a dairy farmer, I found it of real interest. And what I found as well was, I mean, what it brought through to me, some of the research was probably aspects that I hadn't really fully thought of or fully appreciated until I read the paper. So I suppose just to put a bit of context on it, the Irish dairy sector has undergone can only be called a transformational change in the past decade. A lot of this has already been covered by Jason. You know, we saw the removal of milk quotas in 2015 after 30 years of supply restrictions. So what we saw from that then was a significant influx of new entrants, as we call it. So those would be farmers that would have been operating in a different enterprise prior to that, maybe beef or tillage, and they were previously precluded from entering dairying. But they were able, with the removal of milk quotas, that gave them the opportunity to enter. We would have seen a major investment program taking place across the industry since 2015. We would estimate at farm level there's probably north of 2 billion has been spent by farmers in facilities associated with dairy farming, be it infrastructure or livestock. And at processor level, we've seen a massive investment as well of well over $1 billion, probably 1.3 billion in processing the additional milk. And we've obviously seen a substantial increase in milk production, which Jason has alluded to and gone through. And he also, to the point that Jason made earlier, is that there's been a significant improvement in on-farm efficiencies. And where that's really, you can see that is in terms of the solids levels. So the percentage fat and protein levels have increased significantly since 2015. And that is driven by much improved efficiencies in terms of utilizing grass-based diets for cows, and also breeding better cows, which has driven higher solids, and higher solids lead to higher profitability. So we've seen that come through strongly. And what we've seen as well is, you know, the dairy industry is a very substantial economic contributor to rural Ireland. If you take a multinational, contributes about 10 cents for every euro that's exported, whereas in the dairy industry, for every euro of exported from dairy, from the dairy industry, about 90 cents is spent in the Irish economy. And moreover, most of that money is spent in rural Ireland, in rural economies, which wouldn't be the case maybe with some other industries, given that they have the tendency to be urban centric by their nature. So I suppose the other thing to say about Irish dairy farming is there's quite a risk and reward profile to it. If you look from a European context, we would have the highest net margins evident in Ireland. And that's very much down to the seasonal production that we have, which is from a grass-based diet, which is not the norm across Europe or worldwide. But that grass-based production system does substantially reduce your cost of production. So if you look at milk prices, output prices in Ireland, they would be below the European average, but the cost of production would be substantially below the European average, and the overall net margins in Ireland would be high when compared with our European counterparts. But that seasonal production model has really delivered for Irish dairy farming, but it does lead to an increased risk profile, and that's down to, and these have been covered in the paper, down to the commodity product portfolio that we have, which is associated with our seasonal production, because our processors are very much focused on powders and butter and cheese, which are you know, they're not that perishable products, because of the fact that we have a huge seasonal production where the bulk of our production and for milk is produced in the summer months. We also have much more weather-related risks because of the fact that we are outdoors for the vast bulk of the year, which wouldn't be the norm in Europe or worldwide. And we also have an elevated currency risk profile because of the fact that we export well over 90% of what we produce as an industry. So that seasonal grass-based production does deliver a high reward, but it does an elevated risk profile associated with it versus what we would call your confinement systems, which is where your cows are indoors all year round, which is the predominant dairy production system globally. And I suppose just to put into profile dairy farming versus other sectors in Ireland, income-wise, it would be much higher. So you could see that income-wise dairy is about €65,000 versus your average of 2024. Of that, direct payments make up less than a third of the family farm income. The average in Ireland would be 75% across all farms, or just over it. But also, there's much higher debt levels in dairy farms. So of farms with borrowings, the average borrowing on a dairy farm is €117,000, which is almost double what your average farm would be. Now, a lot of that is because of the profitability, because obviously if you want to carry debt You have to have profits to be able to make the repayments. So that's a function of that too. And it's a function of the intensive nature of investment that's required on dairy farms. And also a function of what Jason said is that they're much larger farms on average. So your average dairy farm is probably maybe twice the average size of a non-dairy farm, or of all farms. So that's just to put in context, and that's from the National Farm Survey from Teagasc. So I suppose in terms of the dairy income volatility, what I took from the paper really was that, first of all, this is a relatively new phenomenon, much more evident now due to the change in EU policy focus, which really that started prior to the removal of milk quotas. That really started in 2007, is where we really started the income volatility happening. So it happened before we saw the milk production increase happening. I think that's an important point to take away. This is not down to necessarily the increase in milk production. This was down to policy changes. And that's predominantly as a result of the volatility in output prices. So it's down to the volatility in milk price, and then obviously being that transponding into income volatility. And that's obviously a significant drag in the industry, income volatility, because it impacts investment plans, it impacts access to finance, it also inhibits innovation and technology uptake. So, income volatility is not a positive. And while you would like to see price variation, I think the point was made very well in the paper. Price variation is welcome, but price volatility, which is what we are seeing much more of now, does have quite a negative drag on the sector. And obviously, from again highlighted in the paper, we do have a limited toolbox available to Irish dairy farmers. The two that have been highlighted very well in the paper are direct payments and the fixed price milk price schemes. And what are unavailable to date are your income stabilization tool, which is a tool that could possibly be used. Farm output or price insurance products, they're very prevalent in the US, and they're not prevalent really at all in the EU. And also mitigation of input price risk. And really, again, that was mentioned in the paper about fertilizer and feed prices. That makes up a huge portion of direct costs on dairy farms. And you can't really mitigate those at the moment. So while you can mitigate your output price through your fixed price schemes, certainly the capacity to mitigate your fertilizer and feed prices, which we've seen a massive increase in the last 6 months, that's not available to the primary producer really at the moment in Ireland, or I would say probably venture maybe across the EU, whereas that would be available if you were a US dairy farmer. So just the other key messages I took from the paper, I suppose, is that direct payments play a significant role in reducing dairy income volatility, which actually, very interestingly, much more effective for lower income farmers, which I think is a welcome thing. And I think that might be associated with the size as well. Lower income farmers probably have a lower production level, and then obviously direct payments make up a higher proportion of their overall income, which again, that was shown quite well in the paper. The expansion has seen an increase in income inequality. I thought was very interesting as well in the paper. And I suppose the question is that due to some farmers not expanding, or is it down to farmers some farmers inefficiently expanding? And again, it did show that fixed milk price schemes also do help reduce income volatility. My own view is that's probably, in 2017, that it probably wasn't as strong. I think as we get more and more data as the years go on, I would think that will become more and more prevalent, because they are playing a much more significant role now as processors become more sophisticated in the offers that they are offering primary producers in terms of the fixed milk price scheme. They are becoming much more sophisticated as we move on, with more and more processors offering much more options, even as the years go by. So I think that may well become the case as we move on. And just to, I suppose, finally, in terms of further analysis, it was mentioned definitely, I think barriers to adoption of fixed milk price schemes is definitely worth possibly looking at for, as an area of research. The relationship between financial indebtedness and fixed milk price schemes and contracts being used, I think would be interesting to look at. I think analysis of the increase in absolute income inequality. Again, I think the paper really showed something very interesting there in terms of the increase in absolute income inequality, and I think that would be something that's worth looking at. And as I mentioned earlier, the development of other risk price options, particularly the input price risk side of it. So I think overall, I thought it was a very, very interesting paper, very well worthwhile, and I'm more than happy to be a proposer of thanks for the paper. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Tadhg. Paul Caskie, can I ask you to come on now, please, to be the second proposer of thanks?
Danny, I'll try and get organized here. Are my slides showing at the moment?
Yes.
Yes.
Not yet. No, I can't see them yet.
How's that? No.
Maybe it's taken a few seconds,
Yeah,
Paul.
just bear with me. I think I might be able to.
I know Maeve has a copy, so I don't know, Maeve, if you're there.
Well, let me try again with this one now. See if this any better.
Not yet, Paul.
It's not showing. Let me see if we can get. I know Maeve has a copy. I don't know if she's online right now. Oh yeah, there we go.
Okay, I think that's Maeve. So Maeve, you'll have to move them forward for me, but thanks very much for that. So first, I would like to thank Jason for his very effective presentation and congratulate him and his co-authors on a well-researched and interesting paper. The analysis is timely, as we are at a point where industry can reflect on the repercussions of more than 10 years of policy reform and also look forward to challenges ahead. It's an analysis that is also relevant to Northern Ireland, as milk processing is fully integrated across the island of Ireland, produces much the same portfolio of products, north and south, and is equally exposed to the influence of global commodity price movements. And also, I think the analysis illustrates once again the importance of the National Farm Survey. It's an invaluable source of data, on this occasion complemented by milk price data from the CSO. The paper makes a useful contribution on the issue. First and foremost, the analysis establishes the pattern and extent of income volatility that has emerged on dairy farms in recent years. Income volatility is a problem, but to some extent, it's a consequence of success, as policy reforms that have contributed to income volatility have also allowed the Irish dairy sector, north and south, to expand and enjoy the benefits of increased sales on global markets. So this is something we should not lose sight of in our consideration of the issue. Secondly, having documented the development and extent of income volatility, the paper assesses the extent to which direct farm payments and fixed price contracts have mitigated the problem. The authors suggest that both mechanisms have a contribution to make in reducing farm income volatility as part of a broader toolkit. Maeve, if you could move on, please, to the next slide. A few observations on the paper and the subject more generally. Fixed price contracts can be described as a specialist tool, I think, as the primary objective is to reduce risk by limiting downside exposure to falling prices. The authors observed a small but statistically significant price premium for farmers who had entered into fixed price contracts in 2016, but not so in 2017. During the 2 years in question, milk prices followed an upward trend generally before starting to fall back. This provides an interesting snapshot into the operation of fixed price contracts. But before coming to any conclusion about their effectiveness, I would suggest that more research is required. And Jason, I think, made remarks to the same effect. A wider consideration of the overall benefits, costs, and importantly, the distribution of costs and benefits amongst supply chain participants needs to be determined over a longer period of time. And I suppose I'm thinking here specifically how are the fixed contract prices protected or paid for, if you like? Do the processors externalize the cost by putting it onto into future markets and hedging their own risk? Or is it internalized in the sense that the milk outside the contract pool has to bear the cost of the protection that's given by the fixed price contracts? Then turning to the cap basic payment, this is not aimed specifically at reducing market volatility. It's a general support to farm income, as Jason has said, and is therefore a relatively blunt instrument, I would argue, in policy terms. The authors believe it has a role to play in supporting farm income, and have cited an earlier study by Knapp and Loughrey that found no positive relationship between the amount of support payment and the market income volatility. In other words, the more direct payments, basic payment that farmers received did not increase market volatility by itself. However, I think this doesn't mean that cap basic payment has no influence on milk supply. If it was removed, many smaller dairy farms in particular might be expected to cease production, as income from market returns would be insufficient to sustain the business and generate a living for the farmers. So likewise, if basic payment was to increase, there is evidence to suggest that this would lead to increased supply, all other things being equal, even though there is no obligation on farmers to do so. So it could be argued that production above the level supported by prevailing market price does increase exposure to market volatility. Therefore, as with fixed price contracts, I think a more detailed consideration of the costs and benefits of the basic payment system is required before we can determine its effectiveness as a solution to farm income volatility. And I'm emphasizing here farm income volatility rather than as a buffer and as a safeguard against low income. I think the other interesting thing, the observation here, is how have farmers reacted to increasing income volatility. The authors report that despite increasing price and income volatility, supply growth has been strong, supply growth in milk, that is, since milk quotas limiting production were eased and then removed. Production has increased in most years since 2009, including years when milk prices have been weak. Average margins per litre have been positive across the period, although not for all farmers, obviously. And we could speculate that many farmers have decided that the best course of action against volatile prices is to incorporate this knowledge into their business model and expand their production base. The experience of the last 10 years does not suggest, on the whole, an industry that is greatly hampered by volatile profits. So I suppose I'm posing the question there, what are the costs to the industry of volatility, and have they already a coping mechanism? So reflecting on this, we can ask, is there a significant problem, and especially thinking about the future? And I think the answer is that there may be. If production growth is the farmer's preferred strategy in future, then dairy farmers may be vulnerable should measures be introduced to mitigate against environmental pressures arising from farm production. Negative externalities such as greenhouse gas emissions, ammonia emissions, and nutrient loss to watercourses are perhaps the most well-known problems. Solutions to these environmental pressures may increase costs or limit production. In these circumstances, the overall profitability could be reduced, and this might increase the problems presented by volatile producer prices, because growth might no longer be a solution, or cost of production might be higher. So in conclusion, volatile market prices and farmer incomes are not an issue that can be, volatile market prices and volatile farmer incomes are not an issue that can be dismissed. It's likely that a toolkit approach may be needed in order to adapt to and mitigate for the issue. Perhaps in considering what is required, it would be useful to take a step back and consider income volatility as a part of a bigger policy agenda aimed at improving farm business resilience and enhancing sustainability. This wider perspective would be helpful, I think, in ensuring a consistent policy approach and in aligning public policy with market objectives. Then the final slide is just some questions arising from some of the comments and observations that I've been making, and the authors may like to address as part of the Q&A. But in conclusion, I would like to thank Jason again for a most stimulating paper, and as I say, I'm very pleased to be the second proposer of thanks. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Danny.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks very much. So we have about 25 minutes or so to open it up for questions and remarks to Jason. So anybody want to come on first, or I'm looking to the Q&A here. John, would you like to come on, John Fitzgerald?
We might have to promote John to
okay, so Maeve, yeah, so just, yeah, I think I can hear John there. Maeve, can you get John Fitzgerald up there?
Yeah, he's on the way.
Great. Anybody else just raise their hand?
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
I had 2 points. One very interesting paper, and it shows that the direct payments play an important role for those on low incomes in reducing volatility. But your results also show those on higher incomes tend to are better able to use the fixed price contract. What would be the implications of capping the direct payments? Because quite big direct payments are going to those on high income, to capping them at a lower level, where they would still be available to reduce volatility for those on low incomes, but those on high incomes would use other mechanisms for dealing with volatility. And second question, the climate bill published earlier this week dramatically increases the amount of emissions that need to be reduced in agriculture by 2030. So there'll have to be substantial culling of cows. If you are reducing the herd size significantly, how would you do it in a way that would minimize the risks in terms of volatility for farm incomes?
Thanks, John. Jason, would you like to take that to start with?
Yeah, I'll start with the first question. It's probably the easier one. Yes, there is evidence there that the uptake of the fixed price contracts, especially during the early years, was higher on the higher income farms, and in some ways that is in line with maybe theory. So as farm farm income or farm wealth is higher, the risk aversion is also tends to be a bit higher. But then we also observe that that not only are the adoption higher on higher income farms, but also direct payments are higher in absolute terms. So there is a debate around capping, where possibly capping could be implemented. It's a very tricky one in practice, probably. Member states have implemented capping on, say, very large payments over 150 or 100 or 150,000. I don't really reach a conclusion from the research on where capping could be implemented. And it is a case that, well, the higher farm incomes may have greater access to the contracts and indeed other forms of risk management tools. There's a lot of information we don't know. So I'll say household savings and so forth would protect farms who are dealing with higher income or more wealthy farmers that may have greater protection from there as well. So you could be, I see that you're making that argument about that it would be an argument in favor of capping, but I think we probably need more information on the availability of contracts and so on. Also the capping, I think the debate around capping, and I think Adam Matthews has written about it as well, that some of the proposals around capping involved adjusting for labour units. So one of the things I don't really do in the paper is adjust for the number of labour units on the farm. Trevor, you might want to come in there on that question.
Yeah, just briefly on that capping question. I mean, it's been around for quite a while at an EU level, and it is a one that there's very much difficulty in getting any agreement on, because at the end of the day, the money we're talking about here is money from Brussels, and there's an overriding concern that if you support capping, ultimately, what will that do for your capacity to the available budget from the European Union? And what I'm saying is, you know, we could introduce a capping mechanism, but we might not be able to hang on to the revenue that's generated from the capping process and redistribute it across other farmers in Ireland. So that's been a concern for a long time amongst the member states. I think in principle, countries are in favor of capping high levels of payments, and you know, in the context of what we're looking at here, these payments aren't enormous compared to some of the payments that are actually out there. But the concern countries typically have is, will it change the share of the CAP budget, and as a result, the EU budget that they actually receive? So that's the concern about that aspect. While I have the opportunity, I might talk to the second question that John asked. Of course, you're probably moving along a few chess pieces further across the board than where we're actually at the moment, in the sense that the climate bill yesterday just makes clear what the national emission reduction target is, and there's further deliberation to take place in terms of the individual sectoral shares. But for the purposes of our question, let's just take it that what you're saying is correct, and there will be a larger effort required on the part of agriculture. I think in the first instance, what agriculture would be seeking to do in that instance would be to try to find additional mitigation actions. And beyond that, yes, you would be into the situation where you're having to reduce the size of the sector, which is effectively what you're saying in talking about culling more cows. But I don't know that that question of income volatility would be near the top of the list of concerns if you were pursuing a policy like that, where you had to constrain the size of the ag sector. I'm not sure that particularly the income volatility issue would be close to the top of the list in terms of the kind of constraints you might be trying to address when you're actually doing that.
Thanks, Trevor and Jason there, and thanks, John, as well. Just looking there, anybody else like to come in?
I think we've Mary Keeney and then Thomas Conifrey.
Great. Mary, would you like to come on there? Maeve, you release both Thomas and Mary.
Good evening, everyone. That was a fascinating paper, brought me back many years to previous research of my own. I'd like to ask the question, to what extent was the contract price offered different from the variable market price, and how much of an incentive was entailed there? Would farmers have considered it worthwhile to take the fixed price contract, or was there a gamble involved, and what was the, could they have been penalised, or to the extent to which they paid off in terms of having the fixed price, and then the extent to which that would follow through into the decision making in subsequent periods? That was my first question. The second question, to what extent over the history was there changes in production regulatory standards then that required or almost enforced investment in facilities, etc. And to the extent that the bank finance might have been advised or been conditional on having more stable and less income volatility. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Mary. Not sure which of the authors would like to take that one up.
Yeah, thanks, Mary, and thanks, John, for the previous question. I know there was some overlap, actually. I think, Mary, your previous work was on the income distribution in Ireland that concerns John's question. I suppose I'll begin with the difference between the fixed milk price contracts, the price that was offered in many of these contracts during 2016 and 2017, and the spot price that was available. So yes, there were significant differences in the fixed prices and the spot prices, but because the opportunities to actually enter a contract only for many of the dairy farms, these opportunities only emerged at certain points during the year and so on, intermittently. Therefore, the decision could only be made at particular points in time, and in some cases, in some cooperatives, there would not have been a significant difference, but in many cases there were. Certainly in early 2017, so significant differences of about 5 cents a litre were evident between the fixed prices that were being offered early in that year and the spot prices that were about to emerge. So there is a certain degree of speculation there. I think it's a very good point that Mary makes, because I think some farmers probably follow the markets more than others, and do gamble based on the outlooks and so forth. I only provide that example of in early 2017, the fixed prices were in the low 30s, whereas the spot prices were about to enter the mid 30 cents per litre range. Farmers may have decided not to enter on the basis of speculation, but also there's the important point as well to make that farmers have exit one contract and may have the opportunity to enter another. And if the prices are quite elevated, as they were in the summer of 2017, there may be a tendency not to enter the new offered contract. Farmers may prefer to go with the spot price when prices are elevated. The durations vary from anything from 1 year maybe to 3 years, and so in general. So there's quite a long spread of durations. The second question, I think, is an interesting research question, and probably with a longer panel, I think it would be worth exploring. Is there at least an association between the adoption of fixed price contracts and the and greater investment on the farm? It's something that we've been intending to do for some time. Anecdotally, yes, there is evidence of loans and borrowings being made contingent on the adoption of fixed price contracts. And I suppose one other important point to make is that the adoption of fixed price contracts might be motivated not just by an attempt to manage the price risk, but also to manage the production risk. So farmers who intend to expand further are more likely to adopt. So I think it's very
great. Thanks, Jason. Thomas, do you want to come on? And Maeve, would you release Michael Darcy and Joe Tracy then as well, please? So Thomas next.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to the presenters and discussants. I've two questions. One quick one. I'm just wondering if the authors have looked elsewhere for examples of things that could go into that toolkit that they mention at the end, and particularly other countries where quotas have been removed for a longer period. Have other places introduced options for farmers to address the income volatility? And then maybe a second one kind of linked to John's initial comment. And also I thought the point of Paul, the second discussant, was interesting when in terms of the direct payments being kind of a blunt instrument for addressing income inequality or income volatility, even if that's what they're doing at present. Given the kind of environmental pressures and the role that dairy will have to play in addressing those, is there any kind of a win-win scheme or proposal that could be designed that maybe would make better use of the direct payments, whereby farmers could be given the opportunity of having a stable income from linked to some environmental goals that would help address some of the income volatility? So I'm just wondering, is there any kind of a win-win there that would address the environmental pressures that would be faced while also maybe helping with the income volatility? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Thomas. I see Fiona has her hand up there. I don't know whether Jason or Fiona.
Yes, go ahead, Fiona.
That's grand. Thanks, Jason. I just might respond to the first question there in relation to the experience in other jurisdictions and what sort of toolkits are out there. And I'd actually be interested to hear Tadhg's response on this as well, because we did some work a number of years ago in relation to this and the type of toolkits that might be out there. And New Zealand and Australia have some really, really interesting approaches to this, and a deposit type scheme in particular as a tax management scheme was floated about. And I know that the IFA had big interest in it at the time. Now, at the time, there was issues to do with state aid rules, and the Department of Agriculture didn't seem to think that it was a floater, but definitely that the deposit type scheme used as a tax incentive, it needs changes in the tax code to do that, but that deposit type scheme can definitely help and has shown to help in Australia and New Zealand to manage the volatility that's in those jurisdictions. So I don't know, maybe the time is now where we've seen a lot of changes in tax code, a lot of changes in rules over the last 12 years, albeit all to do with COVID, but maybe state aid rules isn't as much of an issue as it was in the past. But I think, yeah, that toolkit it definitely is an extensive one that we could look at. I don't know if Tadhg is still there. I'd be interested to hear what the IFA's thoughts on that are, and are deposit type schemes, insurance type schemes, something that the IFA would still be interested in looking at.
Tadhg, do you want to give a binary answer to that?
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, so I suppose just as you say, because it's something I looked at. I was fortunate enough to do an Nuffield scholarship in about 10 years ago, and at the time I actually got great support from Declan O'Connor, who was who was one of the authors, and I suppose part of that I looked at. We looked at the futures. I looked at a number of price risk management mechanisms. So one of them was futures markets in the States, and it's great to see that since then we've seen the fixed price schemes come to pass, which some of which are quite heavily based on futures schemes. But the other thing that one of the other aspects we looked at was mutual funds, which was mentioned as well as in part of the income stability tool. I'm not so sure. I just wonder whether that will ever come to pass in Ireland. It's quite much more suited towards a crop-based farms. Now, having said that, in the States, there's a very comprehensive dairy program, which is linked to insurance and works very well. But that is heavily linked to the futures markets, which are very developed in the States. But also, I did look at the farm deposit scheme in Australia, in particular, where it worked very well. And certainly, there is strong reasons behind why you would look at doing a scheme like that in Ireland. It has been proposed in the past. I only joined the IFA in December, but I understand it was part of their pre-budget submission in previous years. And state aid was always part of it, the problem. Now, as you say, there has been a relaxation of state aid rules. So certainly that would play a major part, because it would act as a counter-cyclical buffer to income. So basically what you would do is you'd be able to put aside funds in a tax efficient manner and then release it back in years where you would see a significant reduction in income. And if after a number of years it didn't happen, you could just then leave it go. So certainly I think it is certainly well worth further analysis on our part of view. And if the state aid side of it could be relaxed, I think it could be potentially a runner for sure.
Thanks, Tadhg. Just kind of conscious of time. I know Michael Darcy and Joe Tracy. I don't know whether Joe is only complimenting the work on the survey, but Michael or Joe, you're welcome to come in, and then we'll go for a wrap up.
Okay, I'll come in then, Joe. So thank you very much for the paper. I come from a dairy background first, and the dairy industry is very different from my father and grandfather supplied milk to the denizens of Dublin from Temple Oak. So John Fitzgerald introduced the Climate Action Bill and the prospect of cows being culled. Now, if we contrast the impact of the absence of coordination in regard to COVID, and then the coordination which was done in reaction to BSE and foot and mouth, isn't it essential that there's sort of some serious in-depth research on a joined up north-south basis done on this before any action is taken, given we have integrated supply chains on the island, and dairy is perhaps the most integrated all-island business? And if Jason, Paul and Tadhg, you get the sense I'm volunteering you for this task, you're absolutely right.
Thanks, Michael. Joe?
Yeah, thanks very much, Danny. I'll be very brief. First of all, it's an excellent paper, and thanks to Jason and colleagues for that. It shows the value of the National Farm Survey. There was one fact and figure, I think, early on, which was the number of specialist dairy farms in 2016 from the Farm Structure Survey. And that, I think, begged the question, is there something more up to date? So just I'm pleased to say we've had a very good experience of collecting the Census of Agriculture at the end of last year. And you can look forward to, I think, a much more detailed data source, on the updated situation on agricultural breakdown, specializations, etc. later in the year. So just letting you know that. But thanks again, and thanks, Dan.
Great, thanks very much, Joe. Thank you as well, Michael. Jason, maybe I'll go back to you,
Okay.
Just to.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Thanks, Joe, for the questions. And I think Trevor, you have your hand up, and also Declan. So you might want to address the last few points there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Paul is still on the call, Paul Caskie, but I'm not sure how receptive Paul would be to the idea of Northern Ireland sharing the challenging problem of reducing Ireland's agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, or at least the emissions south of the border. I don't think, and Paul can chime in here if he wishes, I don't think agriculture is under anything like the same pressure to reduce its emissions in Northern Ireland as is the case here in the south. I'm sure there would be some implications of just pressing ahead and doing this south of the border. It's already the case that we import a lot of our drinking milk from Northern Ireland because we don't really produce enough milk in the winter period this side of the border to meet demand. So, I mean, that would be one consideration, I guess, at least that would come into play. But I can't see farmers in Northern Ireland being too receptive to the idea that they have to play a role in what really is, in my view anyway, at least our problem to deal with.
Paul and Declan, then maybe, and we'll finish up.
Well, I'll just come back very quickly, Danny. Well, we're in much the same position, Trevor, and everyone else on the line. To be perfectly honest, I believe agriculture contributes about 35% of emissions in the Republic. It's 30% here. We have net carbon zero legislation, albeit a private member's bill coming forward. And there'll be no avoiding it. It's tied in with ammonia as well. It's also tied in with I feel as well with the problem of eutrophication of water. So I think all that plays to a bigger picture, which was the point I was trying to make about improving the sustainability of agricultural production. And I think, that's a whole other debate, which I won't start into now, but I'm always interested in collaboration and in joint research. So, happy to take the conversation up again offline.
Very good. I see a paper coming to the Society on the back of that challenge. Declan, one of the co-authors as well, Declan O'Connor.
Yeah, just briefly, there was a question there about other tools. So, I mean, across the world, there are many other tools developed. So, I mean, if you go to the US, they have a very, very well-advanced insurance scheme, right? Which I think a lot of farmers in the EU would be very envious of. There is a large amount of protection there. The Canadians have taken a different approach, and they rely on supply management. So supply management is always a risk management tool. Now, it's not one I'd advocate, for obvious reasons. We've left quotas behind here. I think there needs to be something probably more proactive and positive done around the single farm payments. I think there is scope there. Tadhg mentioned the farm deposit scheme. I think there's an opportunity maybe to marry the two, and maybe to particularly allow lower income farmers to deposit some of their single farm payment in the better years into a deposit type scheme. Because as Fiona said and Tadhg has said, these have been very, very effective in Australia. So I think maybe a little bit of thinking outside the box there could be warranted. I mean, I think there is potential there maybe to use the single farm payment scheme in a more anti-cyclical manner, rather than pro-cyclical as it is at present. Farmers get this payment regardless of whether their incomes are good or bad in a particular year. So I think there's probably something that could be worked there. So great. I'll leave it at that. I'm conscious of the time.
Thanks very much, Declan, and nice to see the Munster Technological University branding there. We'll have to get the title right in the paper. Just thanks to Jason, to Declan, to Fiona, Trevor, and Thia, who I'm not sure was with us or not tonight. But listen, thank you very much for a great paper. Thanks to the proposers of thanks as well, to Tadhg and Paul, and to everybody for joining us. Again, we're recording it now, so it's easier for us to follow up on the contributions. But again, if you please would direct them to the Honorary Secretary. Ronan, do you want to come in to give any notices at the end?
Hi, Danny. This is Alan here. Ronan
Alan.
sends his apologies. He had to run off to teach a class. He just asked me to remind people that the symposium is on April 29th, and that we'll be letting people know in due course with a reminder email.
Very good. So that symposium is on trade agreements, and so we have written on confirmation from the British Embassy on that, but we have the EU ambassador, the Canadian EU ambassador, who's obviously been involved in CETA, the trade agreement we've had between the UK and the EU, and then we will also have names escape me for the moment from the SRI on trade policy on that night as well. So listen, without further ado, I'll say good night to everybody, and thank you. Thank you very much. Martina Lawrence was the name I was trying to think of. Apologies to Martina. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye everybody. Thanks.